The idea behind today's video is going to be for us to review the different artifacts that interact with transaction matching within NSAR and what is the purpose behind them. So what you see here is going to be the web application of NSAR, and something that you need to be aware of is that we have two full utilities that interact within them, and those are going to be the reconciliation compliance piece, which you will find under this reconciliations card. But then the utility that we're going to cover today is going to be the transaction matching. So that's going to be found under this UI, but the first thing that we are going to review is going to be the different artifacts that are required in order for us to configure a correct transaction matching process within NSAR. The first thing that you need to be aware of is that we got different formats that are going to be applied to the different reconciliations that we got in the system. And in order for you to access that UI, you will need to come here into the navigation menu and then click on configuration. And under configuration, you will find on the left panel an icon that will represent the formats. When you click on it, you will see that we already have some predefined formats within the tool that comes by default. But then you will also have the possibility of create a new format. The reasoning behind creating a new format is because we will need to explicitly tell the system that the method that we're intending to use is going to use transaction matching. So you can see here that we already have some of them being applied. One example of it is going to be this NSTM bank. This one in specific is expecting us to bring the information from NetSuite in terms of the transaction and the ending balance for the cash accounts. And then we're going to compare that against the BAI statement. Well, the BAI will be the format against the bank statement of the customer. And then you can see that the method applied to this specific format is going to be balance comparison with transaction matching, which basically means that we're intending to compare not only the ending balances, but on top of that, we're going to do a matching of those transactions. So think about transaction matching as that additional layer of complexity that you can include in NSAR in order for you to identify those missing transactions in the system. So the first thing that we will need to configure in order for us to set up a transaction matching process is going to be for us to create a format that has a method that includes transaction matching on it. So if I open this format, you can see that it will use this method, and on top of that is actually referencing a specific match type. This match type is going to be the place or the artifact in which we will be able to determine which are going to be the data sources, and on top of that is going to show us which are going to be the different rules or criteria that we're going to apply in order for us to run the auto match, which is going to be that process that will identify those transactions from both data sources. Then in here, you can also configure some other layout parameters from the transaction matching UI. However, that's not something that we're going to cover during this session. What is important about this is that we need to create a format that includes transaction matching as part of the method. In this case, we're going to do an example of balance comparison with transaction matching that references this specific match type that I'm going to explain what that is in just a few moments. In order for us to access the match types, you can directly click here on this card, or you can go again into the navigation menu and click on match types. That will take you to this UI that you see here. You can see that right now we have a lot of match types enabled in here, and you can create multiple ones. I think the main criteria that you're intending to foresee when creating a new match type, it's going to be if the data sources are different, or maybe you need to apply a different set of rules or criteria for those transactions to be matched. On the format that we created, if you remember, we were referencing this specific match type that was the NSGL to bank. So let's open this one so you can see how this is being composed. The first thing that you need to be aware of is that in case I want to do any changes on this specific match type, I will need to switch the status for it to be pending, and that will allow me to perform an action on the configuration of this match type. If we don't switch this back to be approved, the end user won't be able to interact with the matching process at all. The second tab that we got in here is going to be our data sources. So in here is where I will define the different fields or columns, let's say, that are going to be required in order for me to perform the transaction matching process. In this example that I'm giving you, that it could be used for a cash account, you can see that I'm actually using two different data sources. One being the bank, and the other one is going to be these GL transaction lines, which basically reflects the data that is coming from NetSuite for the transactions. So on the bank side, you can see that I can check or uncheck some of the options in here that will allow me, for example, for an end user to delete a transaction manually, or maybe to split it into two different transactions in case that's something that is desired by them. And then all the way down, we have all those fields that we're intending to pull from the bank. The ones that you see here correspond actually to what you will usually see on a BAI file, and the application is going to offer you an easier way for you to configure those in the system because it has some pre-configured, let's say, utilities in data exchange in order for you to bring that information on the BAI format. And it also includes other traditional formats that are going to be Swift and empty. So in here, basically what we're determining is that we need the amount, and that's going to be a required field. And it's also going to be our balancing attribute. So this is going to be the amount that we are going to compare against the other amount coming from the other data source, that in this case, again, it's going to be NetSuite ERP. Then we can put something of number type. So this just simplify the way that you're going to interact with those strings, or not strings, with those fields. And then the remaining configuration, you can see that we got the transaction date, which in this case is going to be the accounting date that we're going to use. So this is going to impact on which is the period that is going to be, let's say, post this against. And then in here, you can see that we have all those additional text fields that might be useful in order for us to do the transaction matching process or set up the criteria, but they are not required, meaning that I can still push a transaction in which I don't have those specific fields in my data set. So the only two required ones are going to be amount and transaction date. So for example, I could load a transaction that has an amount and a transaction date, but it doesn't actually contain a bank text. That's something that will be possible because we configure that for not to be required. Then we got our other side. So you can see that this is going to be a really out of the box configuration of the NetSuite ERP side of the transactions. And in here, you can see that I also have a date. In this case, it has a different naming convention as the date that is coming from the bank, but it's going to be still my accounting date, and it's also going to be required. On top of that, we also have the currency for it to be required, and I got my transaction key for it to be required. The transaction key is going to be something really useful for us, and you can see that we have a column that is explicit on which is the key of my transactions. And this is going to be basically the way that we can prevent duplicates to be loaded into the system. That's the main reason behind the keys, for us to identify if something was already loaded into the system. So once we have set up our two different data sources, you can add new attributes by clicking here on the plus. You can select the different types that we got available, and then you can make you can tell the system if that's something that the end user will be able to edit, or if that's the key that we're going to use or require. You can see that the accounting data and the balancing attribute are disabled. And the reasoning behind that is because we already have some fields assigned to that specific piece. If you want to create something more complex, you can always use this calculation utility that will allow you to create some custom scripts in order for you to reference maybe other data or some logic that you want to put on that field for it to be generated automatically when you're pulling the information on it. Then in here, we got some transaction types. So when you're doing a transaction matching, there could be the case that you want to create an adjustment on a specific side of the data sources. And this is going to be basically the layout that you're intending to use here. So in this case, we have the default adjustment, and you can see that you can post that against the bank, or you can post that against NetSuite ERP. And it will allow you to do this when you run a manual match rule. So basically, this is going to allow you to set up the different fields that you want the end user to fill when they do an adjustment. So if the ID, the name, and the description are not good enough, I can always create a new one that contains the information that I need that user to put on the adjustment. And it's going to be pretty similar with the support. So you can just customize the fields that you're intending the end user to fill. Then in the match process, this might be the most interesting one. You can see that right now we have two different match processes. The order of execution of those match processes are going to obey the logic that you see here. So in this specific example, you can see that the first match process that I got is going to be an offset. And the idea behind that offset is that I'm going to just take a look at a single data source, in this case, the GL side, and I'm going to validate for those transactions that were might be an offset. So let's say that you have transactions for $100, you might want to get rid of it because you already posted something for minus $100. That's going to be the idea behind this offset. So this match process can be run against a single data source. That's the main idea. So then what we got in here is going to be the ID of my match process. You can put a name on it, and then you can select which is going to be how many data sources and which is going to be the data source that you're intending to use. In this case, you can see that this is going to be a single data source, and it's being used this match process against the GL side, which is going to be NetSuite in our case. Then you can configure other types of attributes in here that I'm not intending to cover right now, but maybe in a different video we can go over those in detail. The most important piece that you will find under the match process is going to be where we can configure the match rules. So what we got in here is going to be basically the criteria that I'm going to use in order for us to get rid of those offsets or those reversals that I was mentioning before with the $100 example that I was giving you. So what I can do is that I can edit one of those rules or I can create a new one from scratch. If I edit this one, I just need to click on the hyperlink on the name of it, and then it will show me how this was built. So you can see that this is really straightforward. It's not not that complex. Basically, what it's doing is that it's validating one-to-one within the same data set, in this case, the GL side. In case something is identified, it will it will move that to the confirm bucket. You can see that we have different buckets. You will need to think about those buckets as something that, depending on how confident you feel with the matching criteria that you have put it on this rule, then you will decide if that needs to have a second look, which is going to be if you put something to be suggested, or confirm if you feel comfortable that no one else needs to take a double look on it. You can always unmatch a transaction that was identified by this auto match process, but just for you to give you like a quick overview of the workflow, the idea will be that we can match as much as we can, and if we feel pretty confident with the criteria that we're using, we're going to put everything for it to be confirmed. But then there are going to be some criteria that maybe will be more loose in a way that, for example, we have a big threshold in terms of the dates, or maybe we don't have a specific tax ID that we can use in order for us to compare those transactions. So I can always put those to be suggested in a way that an end user then is going to come into the transaction matching UI and deny, or they can confirm or reject the corresponding match that was suggested by NSAR. Then in here I can activate it or not. In here I can use some filters. So filters are going to be really useful if you already know which is the type of transaction that you're intending to go over with this matching criteria. So let's say that I want to create a brand new rule from scratch, and I can always create a filter that only compares the transactions that meet the specific criteria. So let's say that I only want to review transactions that correspond to invoices. I can create a filter that identifies those invoices, so I will only run this automatch rule for those invoices. That will be the idea. And all the way down, we have the possibility of add the new conditions. In this case, we already have one that is going to be the amount matches exactly. So the only thing that this offset reversal is doing is that is reviewing if a transaction has the opposite sign, and then it's going to match those together. But let's say that that's a really simple criteria for me to use. I can always create a new one by clicking on this plus icon here. And then what I can do is that I can reference a specific attribute. So let's say that in this case, the memo is going to be the same. So that will depend on how the data is being input on the source system or in the data set that you're intending to use in here. But I could say, for example, that the memo will match as well. And then I can just save this and my rule will be updated. In order for you to see those changes apply, you might need to rerun the auto match so the new criteria gets picked up by the process, but that will be the idea. Then, if we review our second match process, we will see that we have a slightly difference between this one and the last one that we see, because the main thing that you see here is going to be that we have two different data sources. The first data source, or what we call the source system in this case, is going to be the geo transaction side, so what is coming from NetSuite, and the subsystem is going to be the bank side. Then again, we have the possibility to configure different attributes that I won't cover during today's call. But then we can go into the match rules, and you can see that in here we got multiple matching criteria for us to determine the match of the transactions. Something that you need to be aware of is that in this case the order do matter. So this first rule that you see here is going to be the first one to be executed, and if something is confirmed or it's being recognized as a match on this first rule, it will be ignored during the second execution of on the execution of the second rule, which is going to be this one here. Also, you can see that we have different types of rules. The first one that we review was a one-to-one, meaning that I'm intending to identify a single transaction against my other data source, but then we have plenty of them for us to use. So we got, in this case, just to give you an example, we have the one-to-many. So let's say that I have a single transaction in my NetSuite ERP that corresponds to multiple transactions on my bank side. I can use the one-to-many rule type in order for me to identify that subset of transactions in the bank side that correspond to a single one in my NetSuite ERP. Many to one is going to be basically the opposite. I have multiple transactions on my NetSuite ERP, and maybe I have a single transaction that is coming from the bank statement on this specific example. And then I got the many to many, and I also have the possibility to do an adjustment. So usually adjustments might be used in order for you to, let's say that you have a difference of a penny, and as soon as you do the match, maybe you can automate that posting of that adjustment of of that penny. Okay, so you can create those different rule types, and here you can see that we got, for example, this one that is a many-to-many matching. It only has two rule conditions, which is going to be make sure that the amount corresponds to the penny against the other source, and then the transaction date is exactly the same. Something that is going to be really useful for you is going to be that you can use tolerance within the matching conditions. So, for example, if I know that there are going to be some delay when the bank is going to post this transaction, I can put the start to be 0, but then the end is going to be 2, meaning that I'm giving some space for the transaction to be posted in the bank, or the opposite is also valid. So you don't need those to be posted on the same date. Okay, so that's going to be the idea behind those. So okay, so those are the main components of setting up the format and then setting up the match type in order for us to use transaction matching in here. The next thing that I wanted to show you is going to be related on how we are going to link the format against the profile. So when we publish a reconciliation, it will become available for the end user to use transaction matching. So something that we can do here is that I'm going to show you how the profile was set up for this specific account. So I will look for my profile that I set up for this specific match type. So you can see in here, this is the specific profile that I'm using for transaction matching. So it's going to be 4-1075 account. And basically, the first thing that you will notice is that the format for this specific one is going to be NSTM bank. This was the format that we reviewed at the beginning, and that was linked to that specific match type. So the next time that I post this specific profile, it will allow me to navigate through my transaction matching UI. If I open my profile, this is going to look more specific in here because you can see that the format that was assigned to it was this NSTM bank, and it also shows the specific method that corresponds to this format, which in this case is going to be balance comparison with transaction matching. The main difference that you will find when you're navigating through the reconciliations and you have a reconciliation that is using transaction matching is that when you open that specific reconciliation, such as the one that we were just reviewing, it will show you this icon all the way up to the right that will allow you to navigate to the transaction matching UI. So you can see that this table is already different from what we saw on the balance comparison because it's not only going to compare the ending balance, it also gives me more detail on anything that is unmatched, anything that is unmatched and supported, and anything that is matched in transit. Okay, that will be the idea. And then if I click here on my matching, it will take me to the transaction matching UI that is going to be basically displaying anything that is still pending to be matched and anything that is suggested. So it needs to do the end user will need to do a double check on those matches in order for us to confirm or deny that that match is correct. So this is the process that we reviewed before, in which we will set up the criteria for those rules, and then we decide in which bucket I want to put that in the system. So some of those matches are going to be straight put into the confirm, so they won't showcase in here. This will only display anything that is still pending for the end user to take an action on. So you can see that we have 19 suggested matches that I'm still planning to take an action on, transaction, sorry. And then if I go here on my second icon, I will be able to confirm or deny those matches. So let's say that I don't think this is the right match for me, I can always discard it. But then if I find that the next one is actually accurate, I can always confirm it. Those changes that I'm applying here are going to be reflected directly on this dashboard that you see here. So right now you can see that it is no longer 19, it's actually 15. Okay, and the unmatched amount actually changed from 13 to 15 because I rejected a suggested match that included two bank transactions. So that will be the idea. You can always go into the main unmatched transactions UI. This will basically show you every single pending to be matched transaction. Something that is going to be worthy for you to know is that in here, none of them, none of the suggested matches will show up in here. The only way that a suggested match shows in here is because I rejected it. So just to give you an example, on the GL side, we got a transaction for $3,740. What I can do is that I can just discard it because I don't think that's going to be the right match for it. And then that will allow me to review that specific transaction again in here. So you can see that now I got my transaction in here. On following videos, we're going to cover how you actually interact within the system in order for you to run the auto match rules and how you can manual match those transactions in here directly in the UI. Thank you so much.